Maybe my yellow tile make things go quicker. We should be live.
Okay, so I guess we'll call this special work session to order. This is a work session of the Commissioners of Poolsville. It's January 21st, 2021. It's now 6:07. Let's see. I'm here, Carrie Cook, Jeff Eck, Jim Brown, Martin Radigan, our town manager, Seth, and our town engineer, John, is with us. And it looks like we really only have one item on our agenda here. Discussion of the increase in the impact fee or connection fees for sewer capacity. And I know that you gave us a report today, Seth. Was it your intention to kind of go over that?
Let me just summarize that for anybody who didn't have an opportunity or anybody who may end up coming back to this to view it. So the staff report provided on this, I'll just go through the synopsis first, is that the sewer estimates for each household that we're using about 325 gallons per day appears to be accurate based on the sewer flows. I'll expand upon these each later. The water usage may indicate a different amount of flow that could potentially exist and go to the sewer treatment plant. There may not be the
Seth?
sewer. Go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it looked like there was a pretty big differential between the water use and the sewer use.
I can explain that.
Okay.
What I'll do is explain it when we get there, but that is a good question, a good point. Let's see, there may not be the sewer capacity as anticipated per the allocation plan, as there was an error in the allocation plan. Essentially, only by lining the sewer lines can we really accurately know what we can actually capture in terms of increased capacity. Commissioner Eck alluded to a difference that I'll explain later that may help provide more light. But if capacity is created, there should be established an increase in the impact fee of $5,000 if you do the $1.8 million worth of work that's necessary, because the purpose of a chunk of this is trying to create capacity for development. So key elements, as mentioned, there's a sewer flow capacity report that really consists of three numbers: the 3-year average flows through the treatment plant, the number of building permits that have been issued but not yet constructed, and the number of approved homes that are not even under construction. The water treatment capacity plan, as we've discussed, is 750,000 gallons. We've also discussed, and the whole point of this is how to create more capacity when we're at our functional limit at the treatment plant, is to try and plug what we call I&I, infiltration and inflow, which is essentially rainwater getting into the sewer systems, which then has to be treated and takes away from potential capacity. So the sewage flow capacity report that was just approved by the town commission the other night for all of calendar year 2020, the average flow to the sewer treatment plant was 707,000 gallons. Again, we have a capacity of 750,000 gallons, but functionally, you want to stay at the 80% range, which means you're about 600,000 gallons of sort of comfortable capacity. You can push beyond that a little bit, as I noted in my report, and we'll discuss that. But the closer you go over 80%, the less days of averages you have to average out your high flows. And I'll get into that more later. So 2020, average flow is 707,000 gallons. 2019, the average flow is 675,000 gallons. And essentially, almost all of those numbers represent legitimate actual flows. That's not based on a model. That's not based on estimation or a guess. That's what's actually treated. Water usage and flows. So one method on capacity is what actually goes to the sewer treatment plant, as just discussed. The second method to try and maybe back into what capacity exists at the sewer treatment plant is to use the water calculation. How much water is essentially billed in our accounts. So clearly the implication here should be that you use a certain amount of water in your home. Most of it leaves the home through the sewer system. Sure, some can go on grass watering and other things and maybe other losses, but cooking and what have you. But for the most part, there should be a fairly close correlation. And so each home on average, as a rough estimate, goes through about 250 gallons of water per day. And in that 250 gallons is estimated a 10% is built into that number, an additional 10% of what people really use to account for the fact that even the best sewer line system will have a 10% inflow into that. So the 250 gallons includes what we anticipate getting into the system, even under the best functioning sewer operations. If you take that 250 gallons of water usage times the 1,992 accounts, that comes out to about 500,000 gallons. That's where Commissioner Eck was saying there seems to be a significant difference between the sewage flows and the water flows. Of course, the sewage flows, we inherently know a lot of I&I gets in there, potentially up to 200,000 gallons per day. And that could be the potential of capture if we do the $1.8 million worth of projects. Now, I wouldn't guesstimate that or do that. I mean, maybe it's 150,000 capture. Still understanding you may find things that you don't even know about yet. But there is clearly this 200,000 gallon gap between water usage and the sewer flows. We expected to have a significant gap. But this just points out the two different ways to calculate it. So are the sewer projections a conservative estimate? I won't go into great detail about that, but basically a simple way to put it is we know that there's the, if you take the sewer flows for FY19, there's about 350 gallons per household in sewer usage. And we're estimating that each house would actually use 325 because that 325 includes some I&I. But the same thing as for 2020, you're still sitting about 350 gallons per home uses of sewage, because there's been a longstanding question of, are our numbers for the projection of sewer flows per home a little high compared to other jurisdictions, which by the metric we use, the answer to that is yes, but it has long accounted for the inflow and infiltration. But when you run the actual numbers hitting the plant, that estimate is fairly accurate. So I can't dig into that and say, our estimates are wrong, because it matches fairly close to the real flows. Then we get into the allocation plan error. So it seemed throughout much of early this year, 2020, I should say, that it looked like the average daily flows were about 600,000 gallons. But really what should have reached back to was a sewer capacity report that each year acknowledges and memorializes how much actually goes to the plant. And the reality is, in 2019, for that calendar year for which I had data, the 675,000 gallons to the plant should have been used. And when you take back the fact that we think we can create 75,000 gallons of capacity, this no longer gives us the buffer, because now we're sitting right at our 80% threshold. It doesn't give us a lot of room. Again, we can still move beyond it a little bit, but it doesn't get better with the 2020 numbers, in which the average daily flows was 707,000 gallons. And if you minus 75,000 off that, we're well above our 80%. You use our best known guesstimate that we can maybe get 100,000 gallons through the $1.8 million. You go from 675 to 575. That puts you slightly below the 80%. But the 707 numbers for 2020 still leave you above 80% in that situation. Honestly, it's an unfortunate situation. It's not what I desire, but this is what we find ourselves with in this numbers with what we have.
Hey, Seth.
Yes.
Do we have a penalty for being beyond over the 80% for 2019 and 2020?
So there's no penalty. Let me explain that as well, and that's a good question. There's no penalty for being over the 80% at all. The penalty comes if you're over the 750,000 gallons. That's where the penalty comes in. The 80% is kind of go ahead.
Is that because there's a maximum that's allowed to be released into the creek?
Yeah, eventually there does come down to an element of outflow in the creek. That's correct. But this is really, the 750 is really an average capacity in which you treat the sewage. It's not how much we discharge. So there's no way in any one day we've ever discharged nearly this much water.
Yeah, we were there.
I should speak loosely on it because there's some other extenuating circumstances. The 80% is, I will call it two things: a good benchmark to live by, and the state can start getting a little bit nervous as you go above that number. But as long as you have a plan stating how you anticipate to address being above 80%, then they can be more comfortable with that. And there's a little bullet point on that I'll get to in a moment. But remember, I think another bullet point that I'm going to speak to right now is this is based on average flows. Some days we could be processing 1.2 million gallons in a 24-hour period, maybe more, through the treatment plant. Other days we may be only treating 450,000. And so we have to level out those averages. And the more you push above the 80%, the less opportunity you have to average out your flows and stay between the 750, right? Because when you have a high flow day, you've got to average that across many lower flow days, right? But it doesn't take much to have 3-4 days where you're processing a couple million gallons, within 3 or 4 days. Then you have to take that and average it amongst these other lower days and hope throughout the whole year you don't exceed 750,000 gallons. That's sort of the warning built into there. Impact fees in other jurisdictions. I'll just speak to this, is that one, it's a little hard. It's always hard to compare apples to apples in this situation. It's always an apples to oranges system here. And a number of communities bake their fees in different ways. But I will say that inherently there are several complications with comparing these. There's the types of services that communities provide, their future projected population. Some places provide fire and police service. Some places, have their parks. Some places don't have parks. Some places do have police. Some have fire and not police, and a combination of both. But one of the tricky things for Poolesville in comparing to other communities in Montgomery County is that we're on our own water and sewer system, and a good portion of what we do collect is for water and sewer in our impact fees. Plus, we have our own park fees, so we have a park fee there. Some places rely on Montgomery County for their parks. We also sort of able to define our future more independently through our own planning and zoning operations, which then determine our density and build out. So when you take impact fees are based on future population or based on the amenities you provide, that begins to make a difference of how your impact fee is calculated. So each impact fee is unique to a community. So as we begin to get towards the end here, the additional improvements needed, as I discussed, there's collectively $360,000 in the next 5 to 10 years that have to be put into well houses. There's a water pipeline on Wooten from Fisher to Hempstone that need to be replaced, the amount of $1.3 million. That's had an extensive amount of breaks and a lot of pipe clamps holding it together now, and that is actually at the end of its useful life by all expectations. And then in this time range, the sewer lagoon, which is basically nothing but a big holding basin for a lot of sewerage. The other thing that happens in there is it gets aerated, so there's little blowers in there, if you will. And that sort of begins a small amount of pre-treatment, but it's mostly holding in that location before it gets pumped over to the wastewater treatment plant. That has a liner that its quality and its condition isn't totally known. The state has kind of given it an eye a couple times, but they've never really said anything about it. We also know that it's just aging out, and there's some old equipment in there and other dysfunctional things, and some of the blowers and need to be upgraded. And we actually have to dredge it because it's not been dredged. We've lost some capacity. So there's a lot of cost with just doing some general maintenance. And by you're in that point, you might as well redo the lagoon, which is going to be needed. Eventually, the state's going to address that issue with us. So I say that to say there's about $4.6 million worth of projects needed in the town exclusive of this situation. We've discussed the cost to create capacity. This is based on the current numbers here, and this really generates the $5,000 fee. If we can create 230 home units, about $7,800 per home to create that capacity. This is where we're looking to fee shift that creation to the development community for their benefit to be able to tie into the system. I will then go, I've already discussed the 80% capacity limit and the function and what that is. That really kind of gets us to staff recommendation and things the town commission will need to consider. You know, there's a certain portion here of about $650,000 that could suffice and be fine for the town's needs in terms of improvements that we could identify and make sure that we're well within our 80%. We're a little bit better. If things leak in other locations, we've built in some surplus capacity to account for that. But if we really want to go for the gold and shoot for both capacity creation to, you know, encourage some building in the town and also take care of some needs over the long term with I&I, you know, the gold standard is the 1.8 million, but that again obviously has a significant cost in addition to some other costs we will be incurring in the town. So there's a tendency, so the recommendation is that there's a $5,000 increase in the impact fee in the event capacity can be created. There's kind of, the justification for the fee is pretty much laid out already, which is that there is a real cost to the town to be able to create this capacity. And it costed us something to be able to create that. And it's for the good of the town and the development community because we feel that's in our benefit. But as with any government service, there's this tendency to believe that it's free just because it's government created and that there's no cost associated with creating this service. But we actually do have a real cost as a community in providing this. And we've even tried to over-provide in the event for development and create it for that purpose. And so there's been a significant impact for us to try and create that capacity. It's the same reason we have a parks fee in lieu is that, you know, people intend to use our parks and there's an impact to that existing park and it's going to additional wear and tear and needed additional maintenance. So we have an impact fee for the parks just for that same thing. You know, you increase the amenities or you maintain equipment that's going to wear out more because you have more population wearing on it. This is the same sort of situation. Our capacity will shrink because we're providing this to folks. So there is a real cost to us as a government entity for creating this. And that's come out as impact to us. And that's where the impact fee could be increased to service this in the event capacity can be created. That is staff report. It is pretty long. It is pretty detailed. I'm here for questions. I know there's a lot of components.
Can I ask you, Seth, am I reading this correctly? And it seems like you're saying here that we really won't know how much more capacity we have by adding liners until the liners have been added. Is that correct?
The short answer is yes. The long answer is conservatively, we believe we know what we can get.
Okay, so you're comfortable making an estimate. I was going to say it's like, you know, it's going to be hard to like impose an impact fee based on what we don't even know, you know.
Correct, and there's a discussion to be had there as well. I think part of the thing is we do know conservatively what we can obtain. We also know optimistically we may be able to overshoot that. Now, we could do all this work and be 100% accurate where we know we should be at, get 75 to 100,000 gallons recaptured into the system. And maybe that other missing 100,000, if you will, between water sewer flow and sewage flow with the improvements, you still have 100,000 gallon difference. Maybe there's a spot we missed, right? So I just want to leave that out there.
Can you, sorry to interrupt you. Ed just sent me a text and he wants to be let in. I think he's joining us late. So
Ed advised that he'd be joining us late and he talked to me about my report earlier.
Hey, Seth, how much is the impact fee per house now?
It's right about 13,000.
Oh, 13,000. So if it went up, that's quite a jump.
It's a jump in terms of where it's at now. That's correct.
And
how do you find we compare to the rest of Montgomery County on impact fees? I know you can't, it's hard and difficult to make the comparison.
I didn't have enough time to dig into that. I know Mount Airy, for example, is one that was very clean and easy to get, was like 18,400. And again, it's also based on level of service, right? I mean, it depends on what they're providing and not providing. A number of these areas rely on WSSC. So in order to understand their impact fees and make it comparable, I need to understand what WSSC charges, and they may have different areas by which they charge for in terms of impact fee, right? So you take a jurisdiction that's in Montgomery County, they may have an impact of fee of 7,000, and maybe WSSC is requiring an 8,000 connection, which is not.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I get that. But what's your best guess? And I'd also ask John if he has any sense of this, like how we compare to the rest of the county.
Well, so for instance, if you go into Rockville, let's take Rockville. They have their own water and sewer system, and they charge by the size of the meter that goes in. And actually, there is some documentation that I sent along that that goes into that, and we are competitive. We're a little low in places. WSSC uses what they call a system development charge, which is a complicated way. A lot of places you find they don't call it an impact fee because there are certain legal requirements for the wording impact fee.
Well, we're one of them.
Huh?
We're one of them.
Yeah. So other jurisdictions call them front benefit charges. They call them, they just have other names for them.
Connection fee, benefit assessment fee.
Right. So the short of it is that most places are WSSC run. So you go through the WSSC connection fee. Rockville has a very progressive fee structure. And it can be, depending on the size of the meter that goes in to service the house, it can be very expensive.
So is it fair to say that our impact fees, or whatever we're calling them, are on the low side?
They tend to be lower than other places, yes.
And if anything, I'd say this in kind of a general statement is, you know, they might be a little bit lower. In a couple other jurisdictions, they might be competitive, but you know, it's not as if we're blowing the market out by a lot as well.
Right.
And
do the developers have any idea that this is under consideration?
The ones that are active and the ones that are in town, yeah, because I've expressed this to them. So, you know, the big players that we would have in town, for example, the Jamesons would know. And of course, you have to have a public hearing and a legal notice before you can pass this. So, you know, there's that process.
I just want to say quickly, I'm not wholly sure that it matters so much what other jurisdictions are doing, because I mean, it looks to me from this report very simply that, you know, we need to make these improvements if we're going to increase our capacity. You know, I guess I'm, you know, I mean, you sold me, but I you know, you guys are the experts on this. I'm wondering, you know, John, do you, how are you feeling about this recommendation in general?
Well, I mean, the repairs have to be done. So somehow you have to fund it. And again, I mean, there's various ways of funding it, and the impact fee is one of them. It would be a little bit of a way to get it done without having to go to, because of all the other things that have to happen, without having to go take a loan or something along those lines. Just to let you know, for instance, I just pulled up real quick the Rockville fee. So they call it a water contribution fee, okay? And for the water, for a 1-inch meter, it's $4,100. For the sewer contribution, it's $5,900. For an 1.5-inch line, which is not unusual, it's $8,200, and the sewer connection is $11,800. So, it's, and then they have it all the way up to a 10-inch meter, which would be possibly what the school would need.
But just even if you take the residential one, the two common residential ones, you're anywhere between $10,000 and $21,000.
Right.
And what I would want to see and make sure that there's no other, because some jurisdictions also then break out their park fee and add that in. Like Mount Airy is like, they're very clear about the tiers of their fees as well that make up their $18,400. So I'd want to go through that before providing it. And again, I want to stress that, Jay hasn't been able to join us, but, John, Jay, and I met for about an hour and a half last week, and Jay's on board with this from a legal standpoint as a justification for the impact fee. And again, we're only charging, the development community for what their impact to the system is, which is key. That's the critical element here. It's not, the way to define how it's getting paid as much as their contribution for having an impact on the system.
Yes, I have a question. I saw the total cost per house was $7,826, and let's say the impact fee of $5,000 went through. Where does the incremental $2,800 come from?
Well, that really ends up being about $650,000 approximately. And so you could say that that's the town's responsibility for its needs and what it really needs to do in the next 8 to 10 years, right? And so that would suffice our needs for that period of time. So we would fund that, and we would be able to fund that difference. Because we, as I noted in another one, and maybe not as clearly in this one, the town does have a certain responsibility to make some of these improvements as well. And so that's, it's not all attributable to development. Let me put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly, things like the lagoon and those other things you mentioned I feel like that's more of a town responsibility.
That's correct.
But where would that 650 come from? I'm doubting that there's a giant chunk of money sitting in the budget waiting to be spent.
So, the couple different ways. One is which, if we do a loan, we would be able to bake this into a loan over a period of time, and we'd be able to amortize this over through, 15, 20, or 30 years. And we'd be able to pay for it through our pay-as-we-go program in terms of our bond debt service.
Seth, just from the experience, I've been through 2 of these already with the town. And both times we've been heavily challenged by the developers that were coming in. Obviously, they don't want to have that cost that they're going to 100% pass on to whoever their customers are going to be. Mm-hmm. At least that's how it works. They won't declare that up front, but we had it with Brightwell Crossing in the beginning of their development. We also had it with Winchester, and we lost. We didn't lose, but we had to adjust because our rational nexus wasn't accurate. Mm-hmm. I have some concerns. I'm very happy that we're not voting on this tonight. So I'm just going to view this as entirely informational. But again, just like I said last week or 2 weeks ago, this is one of the biggest things this board will probably ever put their hands into. So there's going to be more consideration to this. And I definitely want Jay Gullo to be in on this. I also want somehow, Seth, and you don't have to do this tonight, but I want to know, why is there a difference between what we came up with before and what we have to do now? And why doesn't the past connection fee pay those bills? Why isn't that past connection fee, does it have to be increased by this much? Because our last connection fee was derived from doing the same thing. We needed more capacity and we had to use I&I. So, I understand things don't get any cheaper. I&I costs more every time you do it. But that is concerning to me too. And you don't have to address this right away.
Sure.
I'm also concerned about that we've collected, unless I'm missing something, we've collected a ton of money in impact fees from our current developments that are still ongoing, set at the old schedule. Mm-hmm. And I know that they're all included in our $13,000 plus connection fee. what have we done with that money? And or do we run the risk of being challenged by whoever is that first developer or second developer or third one or whoever, and people come at the same time? What did they say? Well, you've already gotten $1 million+ in connection fees. Where did the money go? And how'd you spend it?
Sure. Well, and some of it, there are a few things for a few forward moving projects. Some of them are on here. Some have been used over the years to make improvements to the plant and other improvements over the years. So some of that money has been spent, in maintenance and upkeep of facilities, and some of them have been deferred a little bit. We probably should have put in more sooner as well. I'm a little bit familiar from others about the previous impact fee changes. Truth be told, the town's never hired, I'm not advising this at all, but the town had never hired an actual impact fee specialist to make the calculations, and you all went downward.
Well, hang time out for a minute. We actually did have a specialist. We didn't hire him. He lived here in town, and he was the one that helped us with both of our previous. But you're right, we didn't hire anybody, but we were lucky enough to have an expert who potentially we'd have them weigh in on this too, just to give it a double check. But he was the one that and I remember the spreadsheet and I remember the negotiation. It was big and it was complicated. Right. Not trying to be overwhelming to everybody, but it was not, it wasn't as simple math as it's coming out to be right now. Because we knew we had to have it justified and we were likely going to be in court. And, a company like Winchester, maybe they're the next people to build houses in Poolsville, maybe not, who knows. But they had their attorneys completely screwed in and tightened in on exactly where we were and what our impact fee looked like and how we had to substantiate it. And we didn't back down. We just saw the wisdom of their logic. So his name is Bill Moore.
You did drop your impact fee from that time, your impact fee rate.
And I'm just, going back to that same point too. And I've got some other disagreements with it, but I do want to vet it out. I do agree that we need to do something. There's no doubt about it. But the methodology is different than where we've been in the past. So maybe you can speak to how we did it before versus how we do it now, how you're proposing we do it now. And it doesn't have to be tonight, but that's something that I think we need to vet out.
I think you have to allude to me what you mean the difference is, because I can't explain the difference if I don't know what the starting point is at.
Well, my recommendation is you get with Wade and potentially you get with Bobby. And, I don't think you need to lean on really Wade for your day-to-day running of the town. You're doing all that. But I think of the sense of history of how we both built the impact fee, connection fee, and the reason why we lowered it, I think is going to be instructive. And again, all I see is that yes, we identify these costs. They're real. The town needs to embark on, probably 650 pretty quick. And I appreciate John. I appreciate all the, the accuracy of the numbers and then the long term as well. But,
well, and just to be clear, why Jay Gullo was originally brought on, right? You remember that?
Yeah.
It was impact fees. So, our
town attorney couldn't do it the last one.
Yeah. And then, so, that's why, Jay and I have gone, Jay has, obviously gone through it. He and I discussed a little bit more. We did dig in the files to make sure we understood what happened in 15, to make sure that wasn't a fee change. It was more of an allocation discussion of how to apportion it. And then what happened in 2009. So that was, that, at least from a Jay standpoint, that history has been in there. I sent him this report in advance of all of you and John, and so they could add any changes or thoughts or consideration.
Yeah, I'd still like to, and I appreciate that, but it's such an important thing to discuss that I think to get the well-roundedness of this, I probably still want to have Jay in on the discussion, because I think we all have to ask some more questions for it that, you're not an attorney. I know you're not trying to play one on Zoom either. I probably just want to have some more, because I still have some questions about how does our 13,000 rational nexus end up having to be roughly 20,000 rational nexus, 5 and 2. And I know that we just need things, but why doesn't the 13,000 still work And, because at 13,000 is going to be what's worked for Brightwell Crossing. It's worked for, Lennar, Westerly Grove. It's worked for Stony Springs. So, if you're just saying inflation is costing that much more, yeah, but it's also about, why is the I&I more expensive now? Are the projects that much bigger than what we projected back in 2015, 2009?
My question is, has it been working? It sounds like we've been over capacity. We've been over the 80% the last 2 years.
So let's back up a little bit. Yeah. I'll give you for instance, the Coteen pump station. In the past, when we used to have a rain event, we used to pump easily over 1 million gallons or have to do some creative pumping. Now, when we have a rain event, we look at approximately 200,000 gallons. Okay. The plant used to, and if you go back in records and you look at what actually used to go to the lagoon, the numbers were extremely high. It wouldn't be unusual to pump 1.5 million or so into the lagoon. Okay. And what the lagoon is it's a surge basin. That's what the intent was when it got passed. As the line backs up, it pumps it into the lagoon, so it doesn't back into people's homes. So I just ran some numbers this go round as an educational purpose for me to find out what the lagoon was pumping in versus what goes through the system and what the volume of the lagoon is, because I was concerned about volumes and things like that. And what we found was that the lagoon is infrequently used now. It's not after every rain event like it was, which means that we're able to transfer that water as we have the ability to transfer it to the wastewater plant to be processed. And there's some other things that Seth and I have talked about regarding capacity and being able to make adjustments within the lagoon if and when the lagoon is rebuilt. It was kind of just a quick study on my part. So what we used to see at the plant does not occur anymore, but like with any aging system, you fix things, and as things get older, they tend to open up again. Think of it this way. I had a discussion with a young engineer today. So when a root goes, you call root a rooter when your pipe has a root in it, right? Because it clogs up. Well, every time a root goes into that pipe, it's opening up a hole which water can transfer through. Mm-hmm. So you figure that the useful life of a system is approximately 50 years. So you do the homework, go back to the 70s and where are you at? So that's one of the things. The other thing is that some of the sections in like Fisher Avenue, we know that has not been addressed. That's a very deep line. So you're dealing with something that's not like anywhere else in the town. When the I&I projects were started, predates me, but carried through the 2010 decades. What was decided to do was go after the low-hanging fruit first, which is a smart thing to do. You have a problem within these subdivisions. It's low, it's easy to get to. The cost factor is much lower. Now we're going after things that aren't as easy to get to and not as easy to take care of.
And to summarize what John said, there was an enormous amount of I&I issues, and they have worked, but we've done two things. One, it's gotten older, as John explained, and then B, we brought on a couple subdivisions which have used some of that newly created capacity. And that's where some of that comes to. I think we've kept with good practices.
Can I ask a question too? Sorry to interrupt, Seth. On the new home communities, which is essentially what we're creating capacity for at this 325 gallon a day, which I said, I'm a little bit surprised, and I'd like to see why or how the calculation is different now than what it used to be for how much is used. You could, if you said something like, well,
true? Is the calculation different?
The calculation is different. We're using more than what we're saying we're using more than what we said we used to use per house.
But actually, that actually fits the trend if you think of the fact that some infrastructure has gotten older, some things that were not the low-hanging fruit didn't get done. Those didn't get better over time. So we have a little bit more I&I than maybe we did with that other one. But I mean, unless there's, let me start from here. I'd love that number to be wrong, but no matter how I run it, when you look at what goes through the treatment plant, I mean, they're not estimates. And unless somebody can tell me where that estimate, where that factual flow number is wrong, then I'm willing to look at it. I'd love to be wrong. I would 100% want to be wrong on this, but the numbers are the numbers.
Seth, I hear you, but I want to hear where we were wrong before, so that we know that. And I know you're not saying we were wrong, but you're basically saying that our I&I, and first of all, I&I always needs to be funded. I get it, and I&I is always happening. Sure. As soon as you get something out, one thing done, you got something else you got to do, or many other things you have to do.
All I'm saying is the 325 is still the same and accurate. So I haven't said it's wrong.
Right, I get it. But so then I want to know why was it? Did we just underestimate before, John? I'm not putting you on the spot, but I mean, we made calculations in 2009 and 2015 based on our safety number and also what we thought were our real numbers, and we invested in our I&I accordingly at that time.
So I was not part of that discussion. Those numbers were, as far as I know, done by Wade. Where he pulled those numbers from, I have no knowledge base.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair enough.
And I sort of stand by what his calculations were from what I'm getting. Mm-hmm. I mean, I actually had played with this number earlier this year, hoping it was different. I was hoping that a 250 number per household was more accurate. Mm-hmm. But the best thing we can hope for is that the I&I is worse than our conservative estimate, and that what we're doing won't plug 100,000 gallons, but might plug 150, 160,000. But, as we all know, hope is nice. Let's play in this realm of comfortability. And if that is the case, that it's more closer to 200,000, then that 325 number might be closer to 300 or 290. And then we can get more back into what maybe other communities have as a little bit closer estimate.
Well, I think in the perfect world, if there weren't any leaks, we'd have only 500,000 gallons because that's only the amount of water that people are using. And so clearly there's 200,000 or 250,000 gallons of water that's leaking into the system because that's how much they measure in the treatment plant. Is that right, Seth?
That's absolutely correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, whatever we do, we have to plug these leaks because it's causing us to be over our average, over our 80%. And we don't want to be over our 80%, for year after year after year, because it will get us into trouble. And presumably new homes will be built in Poolsville, right? Otherwise we get to say, well, time out, no more new homes. Yeah.
And are we also having to accommodate for just more rainfall? Just sort of the new norm in terms of that?
Well, we have seen our normal rainfall is approximately 48 inches. Let me close the door. A vacuum just came into the office.
Oh, he's in his office.
Yeah.
Real office.
Yeah, exactly. So it's approximately 48 inches a year. Okay. Last year, I think we had 54. And as you recall, one of the things that drove the averages up was 2019.
Right.
Or 2018. I guess it was 2018 now. We had almost 84 inches of rain,
right,
which was incredibly wet, but it is what it is. Now, if we return back to the 40 some inches of rain, our averages we would expect with I&I to go down. So let me just pull this up.
Yeah, I think we have to give up hope on that.
Well,
Well,
and even, I haven't played with those numbers. I haven't played with those numbers. I'm sorry, Jim, a minute. But even I played with those numbers. Let's say the rain was a little bit more favorable and we threw out one of the years that was a little bit anomaly. They all still sit about 600-ish on a good year of flow.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, you're still in an area where you don't want to be giving out a lot of capacity because the average, even on a good year, is 600,000 ish without current improvements, is what I should say. With current improvements, that'd be a lot better, but that's where we sort of have to operate until improvements come along.
Well, we can't control the rain. And for my 2 cents, we want more rain because that fills up the aquifers and that's what comes out of our tap. So I'm not praying for less rain.
We would hope it would be the average rainfall.
Yeah, average rainfall. Yeah.
It's all relative, I guess.
Just FYI, I'm certainly not a climate denier. The 3-year rolling average prior to this 3-year period that we're in right now, the 3-year rolling average reestablishes itself every year. The 3-year rolling average for the last 3 years is dramatically more, as I remember, than it was for the 3 years prior to that. So, and that also helped contribute, I think, to some of our lower numbers that we had, and didn't give us a false sense of security, but it did help justify the fact that all of our I&I investment dollars, as I remember, were just catastrophically great. And that it seems like everything we touched, John, you can back me up on this.
Correct.
Everything we did on I&I was like amazing. It really worked.
Right. And in the past, it has worked. I mean, the projects that we did,
they're still holding up.
They're still holding up. The techniques we used, unlike some other jurisdictions, they've had problems. Ours, find a big piece of wood, hasn't had any problem at all. Okay. And we pray it doesn't have any problem. The money's been well spent. This started back in the 90s. The town did some mainline linings. And then they saw that they did get that it worked well. They decided in 2001 to go ahead and do a pilot project into Wesman. And that worked really well. And then they went ahead and did all of Wesman. And then the Coteen pump station, again, it's the low-hanging fruit. We knew that there was a problem because of the type of pipe that's present. So we addressed those problems. Now it comes down to dealing with things that aren't going to be as easy, and the expense is going to be greater. Per linear foot and per gain, it's going to cost you a little bit more.
Maybe in the past, I don't know, maybe in the past, the immediate need to, fix the leaks wasn't quite there. But from what I read on this report and from what I'm hearing from you all who are the experts, it sure seems like it's on the horizon now.
Well, just to kind of, we'll use this pun, just to plug some holes, is that, the past practices, the past estimates, some of the past things, were accurate and worked well. We just find ourselves with additional needs that are different from then. John has explained to us before, some of the technology has improved and changed in terms of doing 90-degree bends into the laterals and those sort of things where we know we have some significant issues, and this isn't a low-hanging fruit. And, there's some, I will say, and, I think there's some significant debatable discussion about how the impact fee was initially recalibrated and readjusted. From all my discussions with everybody, it's gone down. Usually impact fees don't go down. And still, I think it was, it was more of a political decision than a calibration issue on how that was adjusted. And
I am going to dispute you on that. It was a calculation. But we can get some more history on that and look it up. And Seth, because the reason why we have to do that is because if you were recalculating the connection fee, let's call it that for now, if you were recalculating the connection fee based on this future need and the need to improve I&I in order to address future need, and also because obviously it's smart, you always have to invest in I&I, and you always have to working on I&I also obviously improves processes and efficiencies beyond just the money and the capacity. It's about efficiencies and running the wastewater treatment plant, electricity use, or making cake, etc. All those things come into play. I would just say that I want in our next get together or prior to our next get together, I still want to get a well-rounded talk with Jay on it. And I also want to have a calculation to show us how come the existing connection fee doesn't apply moving forward, because the existing connection fee was basically created to also create very similar funding for improvements to I&I through a time period. So we have to be able to show somebody in the future that additional funding over and beyond the rational nexus that was created is now needed in order to create this capacity. If you've done that already, you can send it to me and I'll read it. And then, I'll be like, yep, Seth, good job. I got it. But that's something I think that we need to talk about, because that's our lawsuit preventer.
Sure. I appreciate that.
I think we need to be able, I kind of agree with Jim, but I kind of agree with Jim. I do agree with Jim. But we need to be able to defend this number. And if the number is wrong, then okay, we need to roll it back or roll it forward or whatever. But I don't understand right now what our next step is in order to put together the information that says this number is a good number.
Let's do this. I mean, that's a reasonable statement. We've been at this a little bit, and I think we're all kind of at a point of general understanding, is that the next step would be, I think we've discussed the broad policy implications and where people have questions, what I'll call it. And really what you almost need up is a follow-up primarily of a few items here. And we could roll this onto another agenda. Jay can be with us. Jay can answer the legal questions, because really the biggest question before us, I think, that Jim keeps asking is, how does this relate to the existing fee, and how does it correlate to that, and how much does the fee need to go up? Does it need to be the 5,000? Does it need to be a little more? Does it need to be a little less? And how does it interface with our existing fee structure?
And also the money and the monies that we've already previously collected for infrastructure investment.
Correct. And I think a lot of those go into the things that have been unidentified. You know what I mean?
That's fine. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I hear you. But still, those fees were collected for a purpose. Now we're essentially either changing or increasing the purpose.
Yeah.
That may be the case, because, John Strong said that the low-hanging fruit's been already been addressed. So now the pipes and whatnot are deeper and require more effort, and more effort usually involves more money. So,
and one thing I want to say about low-hanging fruit, Jeff, is that we can categorize it as low-hanging fruit, but in reality, it was most benefit, least expense.
Okay, right.
And so that was a little bit different than low-hanging fruit would be easy. And we didn't do easy necessarily. I mean, we did some of it was easy because it was structured and on a per residence basis, but it wasn't necessarily, we had to make decisions on tearing up every single person's front yard. So, and that involved work and cost and money. And John, quote me if I'm wrong, but it was effective too.
It was very effective. And when I speak low-hanging fruit, it simply means that we knew we were going to get what we could, and this was probably the best synopsis to get things done and get the biggest bang for your money that's being spent.
Yeah.
Is that where you mentioned the coteen was reduced from almost 1 million to 200,000?
It was over 1 million gallons they would have at that plant. The thing would go into alarm all the time, and now we're on a rainy day. Our normal flows, we still have an I&I problem. There's no doubt about it. But our normal flows in a very high rain event, a wet season, maybe 200,000. which is it's the picture book for bringing the system down like that.
Yeah,
got to figure that Coteen probably serves almost half the town when you start doing up all the houses and such. Maybe a little.
And you guys, and John's, I mean, I'm definitely was not trying to be critical about the low hanging, but the naming of it. Yeah. And the bang for the buck, you guys, isn't just like, okay, we did it because it would save us the most. It wasn't necessarily that. If you'll recall, the town had, fast oncoming I&I issues that was basically putting sewage in people's basements. So we just didn't do cost effective. We did, okay, we've literally got crap coming up in people's basements. Yeah. And that's, a modern civilized town doesn't have those issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the investment had to go just for that. It would have been nice if we could just reline pipes solely and redo connections and make them better.
Well, I would like to have a conversation, maybe not tonight or when, but I'm not seeing this as a long-term solution. I'm seeing this as a necessary short or medium-term solution, but I don't see this is going to carry us for 30 years.
What won't carry for 30 years? Clarify.
No, but we have to figure out what to do, right? We can't just pass it on to the next folks.
Well, also too, Jeff, note this, and I give Bryce Hallbrook a lot of credit for this. He was the one that told us, that made us start thinking about, there's plenty of, the town has money to do things that are really cool for our residents.
Yeah.
But if we don't have a constant drumbeat of I&I, which also translates to impact fees or connection fees supporting the I&I, then you're missing the boat. And you're ending up going to be the two things. One is you won't be able to grow to keep your tax base right. And then the other side of it is you're going to have people with sewage coming up to their basements.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're always juggling that. And Seth, don't get me wrong. I don't have the idea behind this is good, but I just need more to make myself feel good about it.
Understandable.
Hey, Andy, is there? Do you have any comments? Is he there? He left us.
I don't know.
Well, I think my point was not so much that I'm anti-I&I. No, I'm very much in favor of doing this project. I mean, literally, it has to be done. There's no doubt about it. And where the money comes from, we can all debate. But I'm just saying in 20, 30 years, and after John Strong has lined every single pipe, right, there's going to be some need for a bigger wastewater treatment plant or, some long-term strategy that I'm not hearing.
Well, and I think, let me put it into context because that's what I needed to understand from you. The long-term strategy with this whole program is barring something we don't know today, you're pretty much capped out at the 700,000 into perpetuity. Let's just say that for simplicity. What it does require you to do is continuously be a little bit honest about the condition of your sewer lines in your town. That, as we reduce some of the inflow and infiltration and allocate some of that to development, you've taken a little bit of a buffer range out for future inflow. Mm-hmm. So you just have to make sure that you keep up on your sewer line system to make sure that, you're at your 10 to 15% ratio and it never gets too high because you don't have the capacity to treat it at the treatment plant. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because, you're kind of almost forced to make sure that your infrastructure, at least underground, is in pretty good condition over the long term. And it keeps you honest from sort of ignoring it because it's out of sight, out of mind. That's what you have to think about, is that you just got to either continue to do more linings, and there's a certain point where you can only line so much and you have to replace the pipe. But at that point, both the original pipe had met its life expectancy, you lined it. That lining met its life expectancy, which is about 50 years, correct, John? Right?
Yeah.
So, hopefully, with due diligence and staying on top of these things and using some of the existing impact fees for some of these projects identified here, we can keep the town on a stable footing to be able to be in a rotational system. That's the long-term answer if you're looking down 100 years from now.
But the other thing is once we stop being able to collect impact fee because we're all capped out at our growth cap, I guess we'll just have to like put money in escrow, like budget for this, right?
Well, yeah, and I think that's the whole discussion.
A special INI account or something.
Well, and let's back away from just exclusively INI. This is what we keep having the discussion about what water and sewer rates are, and are they able to maintain the infrastructure moving over the long run and the long term? That's where that discussion now merges into here, right? You're able to use, the appropriate impact that a development is actually creating towards, some of your infrastructure things to get them there, but then there will eventually be a town sort of responsibility for those items. In this case, we're talking about, fee rate structure to maintain those moving forward into the future.
Well, that is a separate discussion, but it's certainly one worth having. Maybe not at this moment, but the town of Poolsville is subsidizing the water rates, so we need to figure out. Is there a way for the water system to be not subsidized by the town of Poolsville, right? To be completely kind of operational on its own revenue.
I think that is
Jeff. So when the time comes, Jeff, like this next budget session.
Yeah,
we're going to have some pretty serious discussions on how all that works, and I think that's something that all of us have to be pretty dug in on. So
yes,
we'll have that.
I'm thinking that that's going to be a somewhat unpleasant discussion, but it has to happen.
Well, you're not going to solve it in day one.
Yeah,
you're not going to solve it in day one, and there's a delicate dance between the property tax and the sewer rate fee, but there's a long-term repercussion.
And we've been incrementally stepping it up too, like trying to catch up, I think the thinking last year was we don't want to just rip the Band-Aid off all at once.
No. And Wade had done some before me. So, there was recognition moving forward that some of these needed to be addressed.
Okay, so what's the next step?
Yeah, what do we need to do now?
Let's do this. Let's take this to the next commission meeting. Because again, really, you've got all your questions out. We have those. Jay will be there to be able to answer some of these technical things that you want answered for comfortability. And then we'll circle back on some of these other questions. And I think
we need to schedule a public hearing then as well, right?
Well, we'll only schedule a public hearing once everybody's ready to actually do that.
Yeah.
So if after the next meeting, you're all ready to say, we're prepared to set a public hearing for the increase of the impact fee of this amount, then you'll have a public hearing.
Okay, great.
Is there a public hearing on the Willard property set date? A date set?
Yes, that's February 1st.
Oh, thank you. I didn't put it in my calendar.
That's our
Hey, Seth.
Yes, Ed.
Sure. Just one question. I know Jim had earlier, I've been listening to the discussion. Jim had asked the question about being able to get some comparisons. And then Jeff said he had agreed with that. I'm curious just to know, what would be the turnaround time to get that information?
We can see if we can get this by February 1st. Particularly I think the big question I think that Jim had raised was about, what's happening with some of the fees and how that is being used. I think the comparison question has sort of dissipated to some extent. But
yeah, I'm in agreement on the apples to oranges. That's difficult with that, but I do think that in the end, we can't ever blow out our affordability for our residents. And just food for thought, everybody. There's a ton of people that want to live in Bethesda, and there's a handful of people that want to live in Poolsville. And of course, we love and welcome every one of them. But every time that we put something together like this, if this number goes up to $20,000 on top of Montgomery County's fees, that's a you buy one of y'all buy a new house one day, maybe here or around here, and it might be $800,000, and 100,000 of that was going to be connection fees, basically, or impact fees between the county and us. That's a lot of money. That's all.
And you get nice parks, and you get nice streets.
Yeah, we get
sewer backups.
But right now we're talking about 5,000, right? So right. If you buy a house that's 500,000, that's
And if you buy a house that's 500,000, you're still paying, with our 5,000, you're going to be paying $85,000 in impact fees. It doesn't matter if your house is 1,000 square feet or if it's 10,000 square feet. It's the same impact fee. We have a lower one for townhouses, I think, by like $1,000. Seth, I don't know if you got that in front of you or not, but we have a lower one for townhouses, but it's not much. Okay. And the county does too, but it's minuscule. They figure 3 bedrooms and 2 baths is the same whether it's in a townhouse or a big colonial.
We have some questions to answer. I will say this though, if it comes down to, if the board decides that we need to find a way to come up with $5,000, per home, I'd at this point, without hearing more, I tend to think it should be included in some kind of an impact fee rather than put in the form of a tax on our current residents. But that's a premature thing. Like we need to have more discussions before we get there.
And my only conjecture for that is that if you talk to the new, so say the new residents, the people that have already, say in Brightwell Crossing, Stony Springs, the new houses in Lennar, they've got an impact fee or connection fee that's been created in order to help establish not just the capacity of the wastewater treatment plant, but the other things that Seth said, the parks, our street lights, things like that we all have to pay for the common benefit of everybody. Well, there's an argument there that there's not a darn thing wrong with their infrastructure, right? In fact, I would challenge, and you, Seth or John, you can back me up on this, but and maybe we were wrong on this before, but don't the new homes have almost a negligible, have we be able to segregate it, break it out by neighborhood? They've had like this negligible impact on our I&I for the most part.
Correct. That has been the past, from what we understand the flows to be. Correct. Mm-hmm. But, and you would expect that. That's a newer system. I mean, the construction is a different technique and the materials are different. So you'd expect that.
What we're talking about, though, is new infrastructure to old infrastructure. Nobody's arguing that the new infrastructure isn't having any increase in the I&I. And that's why this isn't really, we talk about I&I like really as if we're charging the developers to fix I&I, which is really not what we're doing. What we're doing is asking developers to pay for capacity they need that we don't need to create for any pressing purpose. So we're selling capacity, not I&I. And the only way we can get capacity is by doing I&I. You have to almost think about this as if we added another area to the wastewater treatment plant for treatment capacity. And you're saying because of new development, we're charging you for that new capacity created at the treatment plant. That's essentially what you're doing with the I&I. It's not fixing it just a fee shift for no particular person. It's so that they have capacity. That is the real issue here.
Understood.
I guess we got the information we need, and we just need to have further discussions with some more information.
Sure. All right.
Yeah, I'm good with it. Thanks, Seth. Good job.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well,
all right. See you next time.
Right.
Yeah. Somebody has to make a motion.
All right. Thanks, Seth.
I make a motion. We adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
I second the motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.